All right, thank you, everybody. Let's kick off the next panel, and then we've got afternoon tea, last chance to win some of those fantastic prizes. So today, we're now going to talk about sustainability. As Simon mentioned earlier, and as several people, some of this technology is chewing up so much of our resources, including energy, to run it. I think someone said this morning that Microsoft are buying a nuclear power plant to try and run. It's chewing up so much power. So this session today is about sustainability, greener profits, unlocking sustainable success. So first off, I'm going to get Caitlin Budge to introduce herself and tell me a little bit more about Clarified Solutions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ronan. Yeah, it is on. Excellent. Thank you. So Clarified Solutions is a consultancy that advises a broad range of businesses across Australia about grant, tendering and capital raising processes in both a public and a private context. Now, I've done this for the last 7.5 years across a broad range of different industries, 13 to be precise, yet I do see trends and patterns that exist throughout, one of which is related to today's sessions, is in the technology, hardware and software space. Its rapid growth is indicative of the types of minds that work within that space and how they choose to iterate in a very rapid manner. And I'm looking forward to this discussion today.
Fantastic. Thank you, Caitlin. Next over to Carrie Sher from Netstock.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Carrie Sher. I come from a very heavy supply chain background. So both in the corporate as well as management consultancy realm. And I now work for a company called Netstock. I've been very fortunate to have met Netstock when they were in their infancy stage. And I was in corporate. When I went into independent consulting, introduced Netstock to a wide variety of my clients. So today I'm looking very, very forward to chatting to everyone about sustainability, availability of data, transparency of data, and what the benefits are from having an optimized inventory portfolio. Now, I know that doesn't seem like the most stimulating of questions, but it is something I'm very passionate about, and I will elaborate just now as to why.
Thank you, Carrie. And finally, over to Adam Wood, certified by ESG. Adam.
Thank you, guys. Adam Wood. I've got a slightly different background in international risk management, credit management. I'm the second generation CEO of a family business. Dad set up a partner network globally. And so we sort of took over the family business and we were hit by the compliance train. So sustainability is very much through the lens of ESG and corporate social responsibility. We were really disrupted, and if we didn't innovate and change and really adopt compliance as a force for good, as a business we were not going to survive. So a little bit of different context to the panel, but yeah, great to be here.
Thanks, Adam. So first question for you, Caitlin. Obviously what you do is you help governments, companies find government grants, and who doesn't want free money? The government's giving it out. Who doesn't want a piece of that? Tell me, what's the current status of the government grants and for blue-collar industry? What should we be looking out for on the horizon? And what kind of steps can you put in place to make yourself tap into what the government... Obviously, they use grants to create a lever. We want to see this change. We're supporting you in this. So just walk us through just where the landscape is.
Wonderful use of wording there, Ronan. So it is indeed a landscape. Imagine yourself in the shifting sands of a desert, walking towards a dune and then taking a rest, and then the dune is actually placed somewhere else. You change course, you attempt to approach that next dune, and then it's changed course again. Now, this is, in essence, reflective of the nature of the grant and tendering space within the governments. What I say is very important for people and businesses to understand is that grants sit within their own ecosystem. They are interrelated. Yes, government departments may be siloed, or at least that's their public face and presentation, but I can assure you they're not. And one thing that I'm going to frame positively is that I think government departments are starting to see the benefits of coming together and affecting change in a meaningful way, rather than thinking that they stand by their own particular points of view. Now, in terms of how businesses can see themselves within that space, is most certainly a contributor to it. One thing that I've also noticed is a trend, is that businesses are more and more influencing the direction and the shape of grants and tenders. The reason being they are offering innovative solutions at different forums and closed room discussions to government panels that are seeking their input. So government and authorities, associated authorities, are starting to realise that there are gaps in their knowledge. They must bring people in from private practices across a range of industries and then inform these particular grants. I was recently having a conversation with one of my clients. It's a national association, and they touch on dozens of different industries, and they were actually brought into a particular discussion so they could inform the creation of a grant which is actually going live in the next few days. So there are practical examples of this existing, so realise that you are empowered to make a difference, but just be very mindful that you sit within a landscape that's forever changing.
Oh, thank you for that detailed answer. Carrie, I've got a question for you. How can companies measure the ROI of sustainability initiatives, and what metrics make sense? Because most people seem to think that sustainability is a net cost rather than a benefit. So how can you measure that ROI?
Okay, so maybe if we take a step back. So I was very fortunate during my career to spend a lot of time in advisement for businesses within the distress space. And what we found, and this is across multiple different industries, and what we found prevalent in all businesses that went from a very healthy state to that of an extreme administration, or maybe just not growing to the level that they wanted. But it really came down to three aspects: management and the dissemination of the strategy for management downwards. Number two was managing debtors, of course, just cash. And third was inventory. And I always walk into a room and I say, I believe I'm an inventory specialist. I work for a fantastic inventory optimization company called Netstock. And you can see people just drift off. And it baffles me because when you look at a balance sheet of any single entity with physical, tangible property, it's normally property that's going to be one of the highest value on their balance sheet, followed very closely by inventory. And I must say, Simon, I loved your speech earlier or your keynote opening earlier when you said, how do we get people to go, and ah? And that's really what we do. So that resonated so much with us, is we want to be able to show people that this is a complex situation. It's a sizable amount of cash. In fact, McKinsey did a study that if there was an issue with the supply chain, for 1 month, it could remove or erode as much as 30 to 50% of that entity's EBITDA. Now, that's massive. This is not something that's generic or something that you can just, wipe away. This is tangible concerns, and we really do bridge that gap at Netstock. So when you ask the question in terms of what measures do you put in place, we are very fortunate that we have a transparent platform that can do exactly that. And it's measures around what your product's doing for your business. And you'd be surprised how few people are able to tell me what their GMROI or gross margin return on inventory investment is. That's for $1 spent in inventory. What does that actually relate to in terms of gross margin? And it's all about transparency of data. So I can come in and preach at length about what are generalist KPIs to make sure that your business is at least reaching benchmark standards, if not more. But if you don't have the fundamental as Simon said earlier, then it means absolutely nothing.
Thank you. And as Peter Drucker once said, what gets measured gets managed. And if we focus on the wrong things, then we don't manage them, they blow out. I know, Adam, you could talk about credit all day long as well, because it's obviously a generational thing, but I'm going to ask you a different question. ESG, it's in, it's out, it's black and it's white, it's fad, it's not. What role does ESG compliance play in gaining a competitive advantage?
Does everybody know what ESG is? Can you raise your hand if you know what ESG stands for? Okay, so those who don't, it's environmental and social governance.
You don't get points for that either, sorry.
In the old days, we used to call it corporate social responsibility. And so it was about showing that you cared about the environment, that you cared about the society, you cared about your community, and that you were making initiatives and contributing to society in an impactful way. ESG changed all of that because it added a governance layer over it. And so you have environmental policy, you've got social policy, but what they were doing was connecting those two things to your balance sheet and showing from, if you're a reporting entity, so a large organisation, you must under Scope 1 and Scope 2 of the ESG global framework, which is a global framework connected to sustainable investment. Go back 2-3 years ago, you wouldn't get funding in the global market, the global supply chain and finance industry if you couldn't position yourself as an ESG-friendly company. Scope 3 meant that if you were an SME supply chain vendor in a reporting entity, in a large company's supply chain, you must also show your ESG credentials. And this, fortunately, the Australian government have pulled the reins on that a little bit because that was coming last year, and there was a lot of reporting and feedback from different industry bodies and submissions to the government. All of that said, we work in the investigation world and the due diligence world. We work with Fortune 500 companies in the US, and we were doing an RFP for due diligence and investigation in Africa for an American Fortune 500. And the first question on their RFP was, what's our ESG standards? And so whether you think this is a thing or not, whether it's intrinsic to your business, if you want to grow into grow beyond heights and take on bigger clients and work with governments, like ISO certification and SOC 2 and data protection, cybersecurity, through the layer of governance, risk and compliance, ESG was coming like a freight train over the last 4 or 5 years. It was everything from BlackRock, it was institutionally through investment funds, it was in all RFPs and you were required to be. In answer to your question, I've seen it cool down a little bit. We've seen that Larry Fink has pulled back a bit on ESG, and some of these investment funds have realised that it's maybe not the monetary model that may not have the return on investment that these hedge funds and global funds are needing, and so there's been a little cooling on it. That said, what we're seeing is people moving towards impact investment and contributing to, like what we've done. We've moved from credit management and risk management. We built a tech platform trying to be a governance, risk and compliance tool for SMEs, for smaller businesses, and we kind of never really hit the mark. We were doing a bit of cybersecurity and data protection and a bit of workplace and ESG. And then we realised, actually, we want to play in the S space. And so we pivoted into being a platform called Safeguarding You. And now we're trying to help solve the problem of child safety, concussion management and mental health in community non-for-profits and in workplaces too. So we're still an ESG, very much a focused organisation, but we're not focused on the check boxes of ESG because we're seeing the expectation pull back a little bit. But we've moved very much into the social side of things. And then at the same time, we have very strong environmental practices because we care about the world and we care about the environment. So depends on where you're at, depends on who your clients are, whether they require you to evidence your ISO credentials or your ESG credentials. But as you move up the food chain to bigger clients, you'll start to see this expectation. It's about being able to show whether it's full-blown certification by an accredited third-party individual, or whether you can just show initiatives that you're contributing to, it's a good place to be.
Okay, thank you. Kate, I'm going to put you on the spot now. Everyone loves a hack, right? Everyone wants a shortcut. Tell me one thing that I can do. With the free money sloshing around in grants, I'm going to call it free money, but I think you've got to work for it. You've got to navigate the bureaucracy of government. Have you got one tip or hack or ways that people can actually utilise those government grants?
Indeed, I do. And it's certainly not free money. There's an opportunity cost involved in each application, and businesses need to be very mindful of that. Whenever you focus the efforts of any members of an organisation towards a project, there's a cost associated, whether that be time, brain power, and actually an economic cost as well. In terms of one of the hacks, you could say, that I ask my clients to apply to all their critical thinking in the early stages is do your due diligence and do it in a lot of depth, because time spent in that planning phase will actually speed up processes that you are going to encounter at a later stage in the application. So when I'm talking about due diligence, I'm not just talking about interrogating that particular opportunity. I'm talking about interrogating your reason for even pursuing it. As many times as I say, yes, I recommend based on certain metrics you should pursue that opportunity, I say no as well. And that gives credibility to the position that I take as well, because I'm able to give a firm and clear rationale as to why people should or should not consider something. One suggestion I have to further elaborate on that particular point is when people are doing their due diligence, just as you would build a business case for any other major project which you're going to take on over, say, a 12 to 18 month period, because guess what? That's how long it's going to take to get an outcome and then start implementing it. You must build a solid rationale that draws in information from multiple areas of the business, has a clear purpose and direction for where it will be heading, but also builds in an element of flexibility. I can't tell you the number of times that I've worked on grant and tender applications where there's an initial set of outcomes that a client hopes to achieve, and by the end, when they've worked their way through a sophisticated process of actually the practical realisation of that project, and they realise it looks slightly different towards the end, but it's more improved. So just ensure that you have an open mind, but that planning phase is really respected. I think less is certainly more in this case, and I would highly recommend, until there is success that you can point to in the grants and tendering space, reduce the number of submissions you wish to do, because freedom of information and all sorts of things, these government departments, they talk to each other and they know every single application that is submitted, there is a digital trace of that. So it's a minor word of warning.
Can I ask to Verona, just to Caitlin, are you seeing in these grants and processes, are you seeing a sustainability requirement? Are you seeing grants for sustainable organisations? Obviously, the sector is growing dramatically, but then when you relate it to dangerous and dirty sectors and things, do you see incentives and broader grant opportunities for businesses that can evidence sustainable practices?
Absolutely, and it's also the interpretation of the word sustainable. In one business, it means a completely different thing to the next. For example, if you're a waste management business, sustainability is sustainable practices, ecological considerations and so on. But then taken into the context of other verticals, sustainability is actually sustainability of those business practices to ensure that business can continue to grow and accelerate change. So yes, there is a critical component of sustainability within each application, but be very mindful about the way that it's defined. And I really encourage you as well, the language that's used in these particular submission documents, don't think that with your underlying assumptions of what the words mean, that holds true. Question and unpack and become as divergent in your thinking as you possibly can within reason for those particular requirements, because what they state as sustainability and what you know to be sustainability most likely do not align. So be very careful. Thank you for your question, Adam.
So two things came out of that. First one was there actually aren't any hacks. And second one is that it requires innovation to actually navigate the ins and outs of dealing with government and making sure that you've done, as you said, your due diligence. Fantastic. We all know that COVID massively disrupted supply chains. We've had 20 odd years of globalization and everything been outsourced. And now a lot of stuff is coming back to Australia. Kerry, I've got a question for you. What are some innovative strategies in green supply chain management that you've seen? So it's not just about getting something for the cheapest possible price anymore. It's about those rigorous supply chains, but also can it be done green? So have you got any sort of case studies or some ideas around that you can do it both sustainably and also ethically?
Absolutely. So when we look at what Netstock does and what any inventory strategy should deal with is, number one, reducing your working capital composition, making sure that you have the best possible fill rate to customer, lowest cost within that supply chain, a visionary approach, and I don't use that word nonchalantly. I've worked with so many executives that say to me, Carrie, it's absolute, I'm in turmoil, I've got cash flow issues, my debtors are a disaster, I don't have time to be innovative. It's just not the right time. And I always say to them, when is the right time? This is the perfect time. But take bite-sized chunks of that. And because the supply chain forms such a large portion of any green endeavor, it's all about making sure, and I know it's a simplistic approach, and I know a lot of people hear the jargon but don't actually tangibly know how to do that, but making sure that you've got the right product at the right place, and it's impossible to do in a manual environment, especially if you work in a multi-tiered supply chain structure. So to answer your question, what have we found work? Number one, it's having the transparency of data, and I spoke earlier about that, to have a look at what is your, and once again, very simplistic terms that often just don't get translated into action because operational people are practical. Pragmatism will take over, and especially in times of distress or turmoil. So it's having a platform that can give you the transparency so you can see, hold on, why on earth am I bringing in 3 shiploads up to Sydney and then transferring it to Melbourne? And once again, a completely daft example, one would think, but it is so incredibly common. So the strategies I use up front is bring in a solid platform like a NetStock that's got all the fancy algorithms, and I'm speaking tomorrow on exactly what that does. But that can save you in terms of working capital, can save you in terms of your petrol allocation. You start having really solid conversations with your third-party logistics providers and your suppliers, for that matter. Because whatever you do at the core, if you're able to provide your suppliers with better foresight, better planning, pipeline planning, they too will also have a reduction in their footprint. So it's just a happy medium all round. So I stress again, inventory is at the core of all entities, and it should be at the forefront of their innovative plan. And often it's not. So that's why I can speak ad nauseum on this, because I love working with clients that just see it as an ops-based initiative that must fall by the wayside.
Thank you, Carrie. Final question for Adam before we open up to questions. What's most crucial about leveraging better compliance culture with the end goal of obviously profitability, but also win-win scenarios, which, Carrie just touched about that as well. Business has to be a two-sided game. It shouldn't be about I win, you lose. It's about creating win-win. And by doing that, you often create sustainability. You unlock those profits that we're talking about. So in that space, Adam, you've pivoted into that. What are you seeing?
Yeah, again, framing it in the compliance lens is appropriate for us because compliance almost killed the family business. And so we were working for Fortune 500s for forever in the US. And their expectations of us of initially cybersecurity, data protection, quality management, risk management, OH&S, all the ISO standards that many of you will be familiar with, then included ESG. And it was the same sort of level of compliance and governance that we needed to show them as a small, essentially an SME vendor to mature companies. Their expectations of us grew and grew and grew. And so in terms of a win-win, well, for us it was survival. And so we had to throw ourselves into that. We saw at the time that because we had a partner network into 100 countries, many of them in emerging parts of Asia and Africa and Baltic CIS and Latin America, most of them didn't know what compliance meant or what an ISO standard was. So we couldn't put in front of them a $50,000 requirement to get certified by a third party. We just needed for them to understand what were the requirements of the RFP or the client contract. And so we looked everywhere for a compliance tool to help an SME understand what do we mean by compliance and best practice. And it didn't exist. It was all enterprise GRC solutions. So we built something for our own business, and then that became the innovation piece. We saw a problem, as Courtney was probably like here. We saw a signal. The signal for us was either survive and thrive or die. And so we saw it was an opportunity, it was necessity that led to an opportunity to build a platform to help SMEs and now non-profits actually understand what is compliance, what is risk management, how do we address this, and how do we turn it from a negative pain in the arse, which most people think of compliance as, into an opportunity to grow your business or grow participation. That's we took that opportunity to make a win-win. And obviously we survived. We kept our clients. We've grown clients. And so positioning, compliance, ESG, sustainability, all of these things, if you do it right and you do it for the right reasons, it sets you out from the rest. It's a unique selling proposition. It shows a customer, whether it's a government supply chain or a major Fortune 500, that not only we're doing this, but we're doing it properly, and that might help you grow your business and win the next contract.
Yeah, fantastic, thank you. I'm going to open it up to the audience as well. So if we put the lights on, we'll ask a couple of questions. Although this topic might, for some people, seem quite dry, is what you alluded to, Kerry, is that some people just drop the ball so much because it's not an interesting part of the business. It's not sexy like marketing. It's not, sometimes incredibly innovating. But you drop the ball on one aspect of your business, and next thing you don't have a business. Like I said at the start, sometimes running a business feels like you're in a leaky old boat, and any moment it could go down and drag you down with it as well. So, any questions from the audience for our panel? Yes, got one here, and then we'll come to you, Tim.
In relation to getting businesses to do the compliances, I find most of the time they do the paperwork in the top end and the compliances and the paperwork and the flow charts. Fantastic, and this is how we do all of these things. And then I sit on the coalface going, that's awesome. How do you get these businesses to understand that it's more than just the office? The compliances are not for them. The compliances they're for the workers on site. And my main thing I find businesses go wrong is they don't understand that consultation is not a dirty word, and giving the workers on site an opportunity to be a part of this process as they build the company is what will actually work out in more profit for them, because happy workers that are compliant, that have the right compliant gear, not the lowest standard, give them the highest level, all of these things is actually where they will make improvements in output. Because happy
how do you
workers,
build culture, mate? We've heard everybody talk about this. Culture isn't a sign on a wall. Culture is all the elements of a business, and this is one of the really important ones. Whether it's OH&S, spot on, mate. Like, compliance is so often tick and flick. Forget it for a year, come back. Hope if you are ISO certified, there's a little bit more to do it. The way we've done it, it's a continuous improvement. I mean, we've brought gamification and continuous improvement into it. So when you do one of our programs, you get a risk score, and that might be 100's really bad, 0's perfect, and you'll land somewhere in between. So we're trying to constantly encourage you to reduce that risk score, because being perfect is impractical in 99.9% of businesses.
I think you got the numbers the wrong way around. I think you want to go up to 100.
Well, no, we want to go down to 0, exactly, okay. in the risk lens. So gamified a little bit. The other big part is transition. Now, again, because we're working in business, but also sporting clubs, and you have volunteers that are on committees that will come and go, and then where does that knowledge reside when that committee or that CRO or whoever the person is, when they go on? Unless your Google Drive or your OneDrives or your documentation is bulletproof, good luck to the next person. So it's continuous improvement first and foremost. Gamify it a little bit, incentivise them to get to improve, as they go along. There's no silver bullet, mate. You'd know it.
Thank you, Tim. Final question, and then.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you to all three of you. So I don't know who this question is for exactly, although Adam, you did sort of touch on this. One of the things you said near the beginning was that you had noticed a shift kind of away from ESG a bit, but you were sort of mentioning how there were new ways of understanding or particular areas that you were supporting businesses or organizations to invest in is one word, but it was also from a place of social responsibility. You mentioned children and some other things. I'm not exactly sure how to speak to that area, but there's so many things which don't necessarily have solid business models behind them, which are critical to support for civilization. And I'm interested in what kinds of, what are the areas, who are the people, what are the processes taking place to support, kind of orchestrating where this social desire to do social good goes. You see what I'm sort of getting at?
100%, mate. Look, ESG is that framework, right? And I'd encourage you to have a look at it. The challenge is once you look under the hood, there's 3 or 4 different frameworks of ESG. The World Economic Forum were one of the major proponents of a framework where they call it people, planet, prosperity and purpose, I think, are the 4 pillars. And so the planet is obviously the environmental element, right? Keep our oceans clean, keep our green forests alive, think of environmental elements. The S in the ESG is social. So it's people, it's community, it's thinking about all of the charities out there that need support, contributing to that in a most meaningful way. There's so many things you could do under the S side of things. And then we focused on, say, child safety, right? Because in Victoria, there's the Victorian Child Safe Standards, which has 11 standards. Well, the first one is cultural inclusion. And so how do we engage with our First Nation people? And so we all get up and say, welcome to country, but what do we do to take it from lip service or virtue signalling to actual meaningful actions within your community? So to understand what the purpose of this global framework and structure is, that now has a governance layer that is connected to balance sheets and profit and losses, have a look into the ESG framework. It was coming like a freight train, as in the startup world, you would not get funding as a startup if you didn't have a very visible position on ESG and you could show all of the metrics. If you're an oil company or a mining company, you would very clearly have to show your ESG credentials if you earn over 100 mil or you're a reporting entity or a very large one. What's coming and what was meant to come under the Scope 3 term was that anyone in their supply chain would also have to be compliant with and visualise their credentials. The Australian government pulled back on that a little bit, and I've noticed a pullback just more broadly, whether that's the result of post-COVID, economic times, inflation, political movements, don't know why necessarily, but we're starting to see the pullback from the regulatory requirement, the compliance requirement, but we're seeing just more impact investment and people wanting to do good for society. So, like we said, you don't have to necessarily tick all the boxes, but just show that you've done the right thing if you want to. If you want to, environmental policies you can have in your office. Do you have a recycling plan? There's some really simple things you can do to do the right thing. And then if your clients require that of you to show them that, well, then there's tools out there that you can show them that you can evidence that and visualise that. But I'll be happy to chat in more detail because it's a can of worms, mate.
Thank you. I think we'll wrap that up from there. Big round of applause for all our panellists. Thank you. Adam, Carrie and Caitlin.